Want to know an insider secret about relationships from someone in the biz who has been studying relationships, being trained about relationships, and working with people about relationships for over a decade? Learning about adult attachment styles is one of the simplest ways to really understand what's going on in them. The more that you can understand your attachment style and the attachment style of the person you're in a relationship with, the easier it will be to understand what's going on. Hi, my name is Heather, and I'm a relationship and empowerment coach, and I love working with people to help them distinguish the barriers and blind spots they put in the way that stop them from having the type of relationships that they truly desire. In service of that, today we're going to continue the conversation about attachment styles in adults and look at how each of the attachment styles works together or doesn't. As a quick reminder, attachment styles will influence the way that we connect or bond with another person. They influence how we give and receive love. And given that bonding and connecting and giving and receiving love is a really critical part of any really close relationship, understanding how the different attachment styles work together can have a huge impact on the overall health, satisfaction, and longevity of a relationship. If you haven't already watched my other videos on attachment styles, you may want to start there, especially if you're new to the attachment styles conversation. Otherwise, let's dive in. Given that one of the key differences between the attachment styles is how they relate to intimacy or the closeness between people, and given that intimacy is a critical part of meaningful and connected relationships, understanding the differences can be really important. There's lots of opportunity for miscommunication and relational breakdowns between the four different attachment styles, especially when you don't have some of this understanding to support you. For example, the secure attachment style is really comfortable with intimacy. The anxious attachment style crave it and love it. The avoidant attachment style are really kind of uncomfortable with it and tend to avoid it. And the disorganized attachment style can swing back and forth between the anxious side of things and the avoidant side of things, making the whole experience for themselves and the other people feel really chaotic, kind of like a come here, go away game. Let's start by looking at the secure attachment style. The secure attachment style is where you'd rather be. They are the most comfortable in relationships. They have the most balanced emotional style in relationships. So it's easier for them to be in relationships than it is for the other attachment styles. So let's start by looking at what a secure attachment style person would look like in a relationship. They tend to be really comfortable with their self-worth, appreciate themselves, and be able to be themselves in a relationship. They're comfortable with expressing their feelings, they're comfortable with expressing their needs, and they're also really comfortable being with others. They will openly seek support from another person, and they'll also allow the contribution of support when needed. They don't get overly anxious when they're apart from their partner. They're comfortable relying on their partner for support. They maintain emotional balance, and they also typically have the skills to manage conflict in healthy ways. Even if they haven't spent a lot of time learning about how to manage conflict, just the fact that they are more comfortable with emotion than the other attachment styles tend to be means they have more space to deal with the disappointments and disagreements that will inevitably come with any relationship. They also tend to be a little bit more resilient and are able to bounce back from any of those disappointments or disagreements in relationships, which makes recovery and repairing relationships a whole lot easier. Next, let's talk about anxious attachment style. These folks prefer to be in a relationship. They will crave feelings of closeness and intimacy with a significant other or with friends. They love relationships and will sometimes even let relationships take over their life, becoming overly fixated on the other person. In fact, sometimes they'll even struggle to trust or rely on their partner despite the fact that they will prefer to be in the relationship. They can struggle to observe boundaries, finding it hard to deal with the space that can show up or the perceived sense of space that'll show up when someone sets a boundary. And it can provoke like panic, even a reaction of anger, and really will maybe trigger that deep-rooted fear that their partner no longer wants to be with them. For the anxious attached folks, their sense of self-worth rests on how they feel they're being treated in the relationship. And they can tend to be a little bit overreactive when they have the experience of a perceived threat, like their partner may be pulling away for something. They can feel anxious and jealous when they're away from their partner, and they can also use guilt and controlling behaviors to try to keep them close. They often will need constant reassurance and lots of attention from their partner, and they may end up then being criticized for being too needy or clingy, and they can struggle to maintain close relationships because of all of this stuff. So being in an anxious attachment style, although relationships are really important to you, doesn't make them easy. Now let's talk about the avoidant attachment style. This attachment style tends to be the independent type. They are very content being on their own and often feel like they don't need others. In fact, when they're in relationships, the more needy or closeness seeking the person, their partner becomes, the more that they will withdraw from the relationship. They tend to be very uncomfortable with emotions, both theirs and their partners, and they can often be accused of being distant, closed off, and even intolerant. When they're experiencing the pull from their partner for closeness, they will sometimes accuse their partner of being too needy as a way to create some distance and separation from them. These guys, because they tend to minimize feelings and focus mostly on rationalizing things, they can be kind of out of touch with what's actually happening for the other person. These people will be more likely to keep secrets from their partner. They may even engage in affairs and relationships that are outside of what might be considered the boundaries of the relationship that they're in to help regain a sense of freedom. They may prefer fleeting and casual relationships to longer term intimate ones because that's easier to maintain their distance and keep the expectations for closeness a little bit lower. Lastly, before we start talking about what each of the pairings actually looks like together, let's talk about the disorganized attachment style. This type of attachment style can be really confusing for people. For this attachment style, they can swing between wanting to be in relationships and then really not wanting to be connected at all. That's sort of like from one end of the anxious spectrum to the other end of the avoidant spectrum. They can be very loving and connected, desiring connection from their partner in one moment, and then the next move like to the other end of the spectrum where they have like resentment or even hate for their partner. They can be insensitive to what their partner is feeling because they can be very consumed with what's actually going on for them and become selfish and controlling, even untrusting in an attempt to try to control or maintain and regain their sense of control inside the relationship. They tend to be really hard on themselves and can also be the sort that will exhibit some negative behavior patterns, like maybe abusing alcohol or drugs, and they can be prone to aggression and violence. Sometimes it can be hard for them to take responsibility for their actions as well because the whole experience is so confusing. And so although they crave security and safety of a meaningful relationship, they can also feel really unworthy of love and terrified of getting hurt and rejected. It makes being in a relationship for these folks really confusing. Now let's talk about the different attachment styles and how they actually work with each other. Except before we get into it, I just want to give a bit of a disclaimer. There is a reality that some of these attachment styles don't work very well with each other. I'm not saying that any of the attachment styles are bad or wrong. I'm just saying they come with their own set of challenges. And when you choose to get into a relationship with someone who has a misaligned attachment style to yours, the amount of times that you will trigger each other will be significantly higher than if you found an attachment style that was more compatible. So, dealing with relationships in general is hard work. And when you add a layer of a misaligned attachment style where you guys are triggering each other all the time, that's choosing an extra layer of struggle. And so just be conscious of that when you're making choices about who you're getting in relationships with. To make this a little easier, maybe a little more fun, I'm going to use the idea of a traffic light with the red for stop, yellow for stop and think about it, and green for go to explain how these pairings work well together. I also want to be clear that I'm making the assumption from the outset that when I'm talking about these pairings, it's as if these people have not started to do their work. So they're not people who have dug in and who have learned about their attachment styles and are healing the core wounding that causes the different attachment styles and have moved their way towards the secure end of the attachment spectrum. I'm talking about people who live in the anxious attachment style or the avoidant attachment style or the disorganized attachment style. As I said before, attachment styles are adaptable. So if you've done work to move yourself towards the secure end of the spectrum, some of this may not be as applicable to you as it would have been previously. Let's start with the secure attachment style, because basically they're the ones who are going to work with all the different attachment styles. Their ability to be with emotion and their awareness of their own internal world makes space for repairing the impact of disappointment and disagreements in relationships a whole lot easier for them than it is for the other styles. So no surprise if you have a secure attachment style with another person who has a secure attachment style, green light, go for it. For reasons already stated, these pairings work really well together. For a securely attached person with an anxious attached style person, this could still be considered green. The steadiness of the securely attached style person can really help to balance that anxious attachment style. The securely attached person will often have space and patience to help build trust in the relationship with the anxious attachment style person, and they may have more patience for dealing with some of the triggers that will come up inevitably from the anxious attached style person. Then if we look at the securely attached style person with the avoidant person, again, this one could be considered green. The comfort that the secure attachment style person has with emotion and with themselves and seeing their own value, they have more ability to be able to deal with the space that the avoidant person needs as they experience building the relationship. So again, the securely attached person likely has more patience for dealing with the triggers that come up with an avoidant attachment style person. And finally, with the securely attached person, if we look at disorganized, I'm going to label this one yellow. Although the securely attached person would absolutely be the best fit for someone who has a disorganized attachment style, it's possible that the best option here would be for the person with a disorganized attachment style to actually work with a professional to deal with at least the beginning stages of managing your triggers before pursuing a relationship with anyone. Sometimes trying to figure out in the relationship what's really going on while you're dealing with the disorganized attachment style can be really complicated. Next, let's talk about the anxious attachment style in relation to the other attachment styles. These folks tend to have a heightened sense of emotional awareness for themselves as others. This can be called hypervigilance, which means that they're hyper aware of any changes that are happening in their behavior of their partner. It's almost like a sixth sense that something's wrong, like there's a change in somehow that something their partner is dealing with or how their partner is feeling. In fact, the number of times that I've heard of an anxious attachment style person having an accurate intuitive hit that something is shifted for their partner simply by the way they texted back or didn't is too many to count. It's almost, do I want to say creepy? First, let's look at anxious attachment style with another anxious attachment style person. With another anxious attachment style, this can be complementary, but I'm still going to label it yellow. There can be the experience of one of the anxious people becoming overwhelmed by the neediness of the other person. So although they may both have a tolerance for the neediness, and they may also both have a real desire for being connected with and close to each other, when one needs more than the other, it's possible that it can start to almost shift that person into avoidant style behaviors, like pulling away and creating distance, because it can start to feel oppressive. So if either party is not actively doing their work or being aware of and responsible for the impact their anxious attachment style has on the relationship and their partner and themselves, getting involved with another anxious attachment style person may be more work than either of you is ready for or is necessary. Anxious attachment style with avoidant attachment style, this one is red all the way. So scarlet it was maroon. Thank you, Taylor Swift. I think all of the heartbreak songs that have ever been written have been written about this particular pairing. The push-pull that will automatically come from this relationship can be really heartbreaking and hard for everybody. The avoidant attachment style can be really good at the beginning of the relationship before the expectation for intimacy and closeness has started to develop, where you're still sort of breaking through the first layers. This can sometimes be called love bombing because of how they show up, like they're available and ready for it. Because the truth is, avoidant attachment style people really do want to be connected. They just struggle with the experience of it. As the avoidant person starts to feel the pull from the anxious attachment style person or the expectation of intimacy for connection, it can feel like pressure and will make the avoidant person pull away. Sometimes this can take weeks. Other times the avoidant can tolerate or manage themselves for years before they crack and find a way to end the relationship. Trust me, truth be told, I am or have been the avoidant attachment style person, and I know this one inside out. This pairing can be really seductive, but it's very painful. The amount of times that or opportunity that's available to trigger the anxious style to fall into the, if I can just be more like blank, then the avoidant will fall in love with me, or will trust me, or will show up, or will change their behavior, or become a potential partner, or whatever that is. Like this is the pairing that happens in. This pairing can also create a lot of game playing for the anxious attachment style person, trying to get the attention of the avoidant person by not responding to or trying to make the avoidant person jealous. So like they'll stop responding to texts, assuming that the avoidant person is also paying attention to the frequency of the texting and that there's been a change in it and that indicates a problem. But for the avoidant person, they're actually just like grateful for the space and don't even necessarily notice that it's a thing. This can be really hard and heartbreaking again for the anxious attachment style person, because they're confused and don't even understand what's going on. Like why isn't the avoidant person responding to my bids for connection and what can be called protest behavior? Even if both parties are doing their work here, unless they have really managed to move themselves to a secure attachment style, the amount of triggering that will happen in this pairing will be significant and potentially unbearable. Highly recommend avoid. And finally, the anxious attachment style with the disorganized attachment style. Once again, avoid this one. It's highly likely that the anxious attachment style person would get sucked into that codependent caretaker fixer role with this type. Seeing it when the disorganized attachment style was in that anxious end of the spectrum where they're craving the connection, they might see that as a sign that this disorganized person can be saved or fixed, or if I'm just patient enough with them, they'll become the partner that I want them to be, or whatever that looks like. And then as soon as they swing into the avoidance side of things, the anxious attachment style person can be really triggered by that. So this one will definitely be a dance without a happy ending. Again, red. I highly recommend to avoid. Then we have avoidant, looking at how avoidants work in relationships. And so given that the avoidant attachment style tends to shy away from or avoid intimacy, maintaining connection with another can actually be challenging. They do tend to prefer to be alone, and they feel safer or more at ease that way. So they've kind of trained themselves and their nervous systems that distance from other people is more comfortable. An avoidant attachment style person with another avoidant attachment style person, I'm going to label this one as yellow. This pairing will likely not go very far. Both parties tend to avoid closeness and intimacy by creating distance and space. So building a relationship with connection is really hard. This can be kind of those, we come back together or connect every now and again, and then there'll be like long periods of time where we're not in communication, and then we'll come back together again, but it never really seems to go anywhere. This may be an avoidant attachment style person with another avoidant attachment style person. The cycles of connection and then distance, whenever one of them feels overwhelmed by intimacy, will just continue to perpetuate. So more often than not, this pairing will peter out rather than go anywhere. And now the avoidant attachment style person with the disorganized attachment style person, this one again would be a red. The push-pull tendencies of the disorganized attachment style person brings this relationship quickly into overwhelm for the avoidant attachment style person. It's possible when the disorganized attachment style person is in their avoidant behaviors that the avoidant will feel comfortable or even move towards the disorganized attachment style person, but then as soon as the shift happens for the disorganized attachment style person, where they move into the need for the intimacy and the connection, then it'll send the avoidant attachment style person away. And so the push-pull back and forth chaos of this can be really, really confusing and hurtful for both people. So regardless, it'll be tumultuous, and I highly recommend that you avoid. The last pairing we'll look at is a disorganized attachment style with a disorganized attachment style person. Again, I would label this one as red. This can be a really passionate and exciting relationship because of the volatility for people who have experienced trauma in their past, and it can also be a really traumatizing experience in the present. With the assumption that both parties haven't done their work here to start healing the core wounding that causes this attachment style, being involved together will be very chaotic and hard. So again, highly recommend avoiding. At this point in the attachment styles conversation, most people are going or leaning either one of two ways. One way is like, oh my God, this was so great, so helpful. Tell me more. This is so informative. I'm learning so much. And the other way can be, oh my God, I'm doomed. Like, this is too much. How am I ever going to fix this? This is a problem. And also, I just keep running into the insecure attachment styles out there. There's no way I'm ever going to find a securely attached person. I'm wondering if that might be a case of like attracts like, that when you're in the insecure attachment styles, you may be more inclined to be attracted to or pull to you the other people who are in the insecure attachment style, especially when you're not conscious of what's going on. But depending on which study you look at, the statistics will show that between 50 and 60% of the population in North America will lean towards the securely attached style. So that means there's lots of securely attached people out there that you can either build friendships with or relationships with and learn from. Also, don't worry at this stage if you're trying to figure out which attachment style is yours. If you see for yourself that there are bits and pieces of all the different things in your behavior or in how you feel while you're in relationships, the key part is figuring out which of the behaviors you have that are impacting you, and then doing the work to deal with or heal the wound that caused it, so you can move yourself towards the securely attached end of that attachment style spectrum. It is possible to do that. Remember, attachment styles are adaptable. Now, if you're wondering, how do I do that? How do I deal with my wounding and move myself towards the securely attached style end of the spectrum? You'll want to make sure you catch my next video, and we'll be talking about ways that each of the different attachment styles can focus on different things to move themselves in that direction. You don't want to miss it, so make sure that you like and subscribe so you get the notification. Also, if you find yourself constantly being involved in relationships with people who are in an insecure attachment style, you may be interested in looking at my series on emotional unavailability. There's a series of videos and companion worksheets that can really help you start to distinguish what's actually going on for you in the background that has you be drawn to or attracted to people like that. And it can be really helpful even in supporting you and starting to lay the foundation for dealing with your anxious attachment style or avoidant attachment style or disorganized attachment style. Thank you again for watching today. I hope you found this helpful. Please share this information with anybody that you think may benefit from having it. In my opinion, the more of us that know about the different attachment styles and what's actually going on in our relationships, the easier we'll all be able to relate to each other, and that just creates a better world. So I'm totally here for it. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.